Hey, what's up there YouTubers? This is the Phoenix here, and in this video I'll be showing you my keyboard setup, what sort of options I use, and my keyboard layout in terms of effective combat, and what sort of utilities I run. So the first things first is to make sure you set up the right configuration for your Elementalist, as this will save you a lot of problems later on. So if you go to options right here, you definitely want to show skill or charge on all your abilities. It's always important to know when your abilities go on cooldown or when they're ready, instead of guessing what the graphical animation is, so that you can formulate better strategies on the go. So this applies to any class, not just Elementalist. You should always have this available. The next thing is camera rotation speed. Now the camera rotation speed is much more vital for FPS games, and for Guild Wars 2 it's not really as important. What the camera rotation speed is referring to is how fast you pan around when you're holding right click. Now this could be on Autorun, this could be using skills at the same time, so this is all your preference. I find it comfortable to be at approximately 40%. Originally I think it was much lower, around here, 10% around there, and 40 just feels great for me. It helps me do really quick attacks by switching around directions, and it's also not too sensitive as well, so it does give me some precision and accuracy. For the next thing you want to disable is double tap to evade. This is actually a preset option that's already set when you start playing Guild Wars 2, and it has caused me to dodge way too many times when I didn't intend it to, and has gotten me killed several times as well. So I use a different button to override it, and I use E, and I'll discuss why more later on. Disable area of effect rings. You definitely don't want to check this out. What this refers to is whenever you're using like a targeting spell like Lightning Flash, it shows that green circle. That's what that option is referring to, and it's really important to know where your ability can land, because you can use Lightning Flash to go on various ridges in the game, and in order to get to different high rises like that. So you definitely want to keep that not check marked. Double click to attack / interact. I don't know too much about this. It really doesn't make a difference in my opinion. For stop auto attacking on target change, this is a very important option to check on, because Ride the Lightning requires you to not have a target or have a target. So there's two different ways to use it. So for instance, you can target an enemy like this in order to bring yourself to your target by using Ride the Lightning, or you can deselect the target and free cast it. So by having this option available, you can use Ride the Lightning in a much more versatile manner. So this is why I checkmarked this. Auto targeting, it's the same thing with Ride the Lightning. You definitely want the option to deselect all targets, and to deselect all targets, you use what you do is you double click the screen or you press escape. Promote skill target, again, that all promotes auto targeting. You definitely don't want to check that out. Fast ground targeting, I originally used this in the beginning when I was doing competitive PvP, and what this does is actually disables the effect of your green ring, as you can see here for Lightning Flash. So instead of actually showing that green marker, it just automatically does it, and that is an extremely big disadvantage. So you should definitely not have that. You want to know exactly where your ability is going to land, because it is crucial. Melee attack assist is another thing. You want to disable this. The reason why you want to disable melee attack assist is if you have this on, you can't run through enemies like this. So for instance, it causes your character to be blocked by the enemy's avatar. And one of the biggest things as an Elementalist is using point blank AoE and line of sight tactics. If you don't know what line of sight refers to, it means putting yourself in the enemy's backside so they can't attack you. When you're using skills like Earth 1 and your Fire Greatsword 1 ability, you can attack in any direction you want. It doesn't really matter. But your enemy has to face you directly, so it's a very big disadvantage on your part to have this check marked. So the next thing you want to set is your keyboard layout. So this is what I currently run. WSAD. I left it exactly the way you started up when you're playing Guild Wars 2, the defaults. Some people would argue that having backpedaling is extremely useless, but in my opinion, backpedaling is extremely useful for the Elementalist, particularly when you're using Drake's Breath or Cone of Cold. Sometimes when you're trying to position yourself and put yourself at mid-range combat, and you can't do that unless you have backpedaling available. So again, if you look at it closely, backpedaling gives you that option to distance yourself from the enemy so that you can hit more reliably. Those are some of the two main uses of backpedaling. Also to backward air dodge as well, or just backward dodging is another reason why you want to have moving backwards or backpedaling. The next thing is dodging. So as I mentioned earlier, I disabled double click to evade, and in turn I'm using E to dodge. So E is right next to WASD, so it's really on hand to dodge whenever you need to in a tight situation, because you are using your movement keys at the same time. Autorun is definitely useful as well. Some people might argue against it, that you don't really need this key, but it saves you a lot of effort when you're moving from place 1 to place 2. You can put yourself on Autorun and then use your camera movement panning by holding right click and move wherever you want. And you can also do this while changing different skills at the same time. I use Autorun pretty frequently, maybe every other second or maybe every second, while I'm actually doing all sorts of crazy combos. And Autorun alleviates the need for me to hold W while doing all these complex sort of actions. The next thing is space for jump. I left that the same just because it's very accessible to the thumb, and you can still do a lot of other cool things with it, such as air dodging, using both my thumb and my middle finger for E to dodge. The next thing is about face. You don't actually need this key. I actually used to use it when I first started playing, but basically what it is when you press Y or about face, you do a 180 and you can immediately do an ambush gank. But well, for instance, let's say an enemy is running behind me and I'm looking backwards and I'm running forward at the same time. I can use about face and then use fire 3 and do a quick ambush. Now I actually just do it by hand. I just do a quick rotation using Autorun and right clicking or holding right click and quickly turning around like that, and it gets the exact same results. So I don't use this right now, and doing that about face by hand is really dependent on your rotation speed of your mouse. So put whatever is comfortable for you. You should get used to quickly turning around like that. You can do it while using Ride the Lightning and then backpedaling updraft, or again just using a quick reverse and doing a fire 3 burning speed. So the next thing I want to discuss is my skill keybinds. So swapping weapons, you don't have a weapon swap as an Elementalist, but you do have Conjurers, which are Conjuror Lightning Hammer, Conjuror Flame Axe, Conjuror Fire Greatsword, Bow, and Shield. So whenever you conjure something, you do have that option to drop the bundle ahead of time, in which you lose out on whatever you're holding at the time frame. And when you do this, you you gain access to all of your normal abilities once again. So it's definitely important to still have that swap button key available. For weapon skills 1 through 5, the first 5 right here, you should leave it the same. It's definitely very easily accessible for your fingers. The healing skill is optional to where you want to put it. You can either put it in 6, or you can put it on F, or you can put it on G. Those are all very viable options for the Elementalist. Sometimes when I'm putting it on 6, I might accidentally press 5 instead when I'm doing Churning Earth, so it has given me problems before. I might want to switch it to G later on, but right now I've been kind of doing this for a long frame of time, so this feels comfortable to me right now. For my utility skills, I use Z, X, C, and V for utility 1, 2, and 3 and elite skill. Originally it's set at 7, 8, 9, and 0, which are not really accessible to your hands by the default setting. So Z, I use my pinky, and then X, I use my second finger, C for my middle finger, and V for my forefinger. And this has yielded really positive results for me. As you see in my videos before, I've been able to quickly react to different situations using this setup. Attunement swaps as first professional skills. F1 to F4 is definitely the most effective way to map up those. For calling target, I left the default setting. It is definitely a good option, or a good default to have here. For targeting nearest enemy and next enemy, the mouse 4 and 5 refer to the thumb buttons on my mouse. So this brings up another thing to talk about. For the hardware that I used for my mouse and keyboard, I use a $20 Logitech keyboard, which is the K200, and it has no special function to it. You don't need a Razer whatever keyboard setups they have right now, or mechanical keyboards. You don't need any of that. You just need a basic functional keyboard that reacts to whatever you press, and that feels ergonomic and that feels natural. So for me, a $20 Logitech keyboard got the job done. I didn't need a gaming keyboard. I didn't need to spend $80 on one, or $100, however much it costs right now. I didn't need any of that. And for my mouse, I'm using the MX510, which it's about a 5 or 6 year old Logitech model mouse. It's inferior to the G16 if you're familiar with that mouse. And to me, it gets the job done. All I have is 2 thumb buttons on my mouse. One for nearest enemy and one for next enemy. That's all you really need. But it's definitely still useful to have 2 thumb buttons on your mouse. You should definitely have that. It's also important to note that your scrolling wheel on your mouse is not actually able to be set on Guild Wars 2, which I have no idea why. Or you can't use scroll up or scroll down. So that's an important note to make. For the rest of these setups, I left it exactly the same. I didn't even change anything. And I left this the same as well. And it's also important to note that left control and left alt, if you ever want to pan around and see what's going on, you should hold both of those at the same time. Your alt button with your thumb and your left control with your pinky. And this gives you a better idea of what is around you when you're solo roaming or doing whatever you want to do. For utilities, the first thing I want to discuss is healing skills. So you have 3 options, and then another option if you're for your racial skill. You have Ether Renewal, Signet of Restoration, or Glyph of Elemental Harmony. For me, I think Ether Renewal is superior to all of the other 2 skills, and this is because you have the lowest cooldown at 15 seconds, and you have a very high heal amount at 5.8k comparatively to the other two abilities. Ether Renewal removes 8 conditions within a span of 4 seconds because there is an after cast effect at the 3.5 second cast time. And removing 8 conditions every 15 to 20 seconds is extremely useful for anything. The only problem and downside of Ether Renewal is it can get interrupted, and this will cause it to go on cooldown, meaning you're going to lose out on a really useful heal if you get knocked down, blown out, or interrupted or dazed. For Signal Restoration, you heal every time you cast a spell, and spells are categorized as 4 different ways. You have just casting your spells, whatever you, on an enemy in combat, that counts as a spell. So casting Impel, that's one spell. Dodging is considered one spell as well. Using Evasive Arcana, the Arcana trait 11, with that unique spell, like that right there, that little flashy animation there, that actually counts as one spell as well. So every time you dodge with a unique Arcana spell, that counts as 2 spells. So you dodge, that counted as one Evasive Arcana dodge roll and a dodge spell. So that adds up twice. Another last spell is the attunement swap. Swapping to an attunement counts as another spell. So to refresh you once again, casting a spell is one spell, dodging is another spell, using Evasive Arcana is another spell, and attunement swapping is another spell. And that all applies to Signal Restoration. So you approximately get 25 to 32 spells every 25 seconds. And that actually adds up to a pretty decent amount, 4 to 5k if I recall correctly. And at the same time, that spell counter can actually work against you when you have confusion, which is the exact opposite of what the Signal Restoration passive does. You take damage for the number of spells you use. So the next healing skill I want to talk about is Glyph of Elemental Harmony. Now this is a great spell if you want to maintain permanent swiftness. It's not really as good as Ether Renewal in my opinion, but in terms of underwater, in terms of using underwater, it's definitely a lot more viable because it actually has a half-second cast time as opposed to a 1.25 second cast time on land. So for underwater, I definitely use Glyph of Elemental Harmony. For my utilities, normally I run 3 cantrips, and the reason for this is you get a lot more benefits when you're running cantrips based on this trait by granting regeneration vigor combined with the cleansing water trait. So every time you use a cantrip, you remove a condition and you get regeneration vigor. That is why a lot of elementalists use cantrips or run 3 cantrips at a time. In addition to that, they also all break stuns. By breaking stuns, that refers to like knockdown by your Earth 4 ability, and also factors into daze as well. So these are all useful things, or having a stun breaker is definitely useful for any tight situations. So I normally run Lightning Flash and Mistform almost all the time. You get so many benefits when you're using Lightning Flash to go on different high rises right here, or casting Churning Earth combined with that. Mistform, you can do Mistform Stomping. You can press F when someone's down, stomp them, and then press Mistform to chain it as well, so you get in a vulnerability state. While doing so, you can also do it while resing somebody, res and then press Mistform. So Mistform does open up a lot of opportunities. For the next cantrip, you can either run Armor of Earth or Cleansing Fire. Personally, I prefer Cleansing Fire just because it's a much lower cooldown at 50 seconds. But Armor of Earth has a 90-second cooldown. But it does grant you protection, stability, and stability for the Elementalist, the only way to actually get it is using Armor of Earth or using Tornado, but that requires you to be in a special form, which takes away all access of your normal abilities. So Armor of Earth is definitely another viable option. For me, again, I prefer Cleansing Fire because it has a much lower cooldown, and it does also remove 3 conditions. And usually I run against several enemies at once, so I'm usually much more pressured and actually have a lot more conditions on me. So that's why I run that. Alternatively, you can go for a more offensive setup. You can also use Arcane Wave combined with Arcane Blast for a more Glass Cannon type build, and you'll run this with either Lightning Flash or Mist form. And this is more for a PvP orientation to be more beneficial to your team. So when you use Arcane Wave and Arcane Blast, that's usually when you're bursting. You might use Burning Speed combined with Fire 5 and then blast at the same time in order to finish off your enemy as quickly as possible. So the next skill I want to make note of for utilities is Glyph of Storms. Glyph of Storms, it applies a storm based on your attunement. It actually applies at the beginning of your cast. So if you're an Earth attunement and you cast Glyph of Storms and then switch to Air attunement, it's going to cast a Earth attunement spell. So for instance, I might cast it and then switch to Air attunement, but it's still a Earth attunement spell. And this Earth attunement spell, as you can see right here, is actually the most useful one of the 4 elements for Glyph of Storms. It applies 3 blinds in a span of 10 seconds for 5 enemies within the area, so that's a total of 15 blinds. And that is extremely vital for PvE applications, for staff users, for Scepter Focus users, for Dagger. And I usually run this when I do fractals, just because of all the team play it offers. The next thing I want to make a note of is Arcane Shield. Arcane Shield is definitely another skill that I also run very frequently in fractals when you get those Agni hits. And you can block instant hit kills by using this skill. So that's definitely another thing to make note of. And for my underwater abilities, actually before I get to that, for the Conjurers, I use all the Conjurers except Conjure Flame-Axe. And Flame-Axe, in my opinion, is pretty inferior. The reason why you might want to use Conjure Frostbow, it's especially useful for its Ice Storm ability, which is used on any structures. For instance, the catapults in the PvP arena can also apply to the tunnels in the Escalonian Catacombs dungeon, those grave mounds, or any sort of structural unit, because what it does is it casts a bunch of icicle projectiles, and the larger the hitbox of your enemy, the more times you hit them. So if you're fighting a really big boss, you actually get more out of this ability than hitting a regular sized person. So that's an important note to make. Definitely the Frostvan ability, or the 3rd ability, is good for applying chill, and the 5th one applies a stun type ability as well. So that's why you might want to use Frostbow. For Lightning Hammer, the reason why you might want to use Lightning Hammer is for its ability to blind and the ability to apply a blast type finisher on a field to apply a combo for your allies. So on your 3rd hit, you get a blast finisher right there and a blind at the same time. That is why this skill is really useful. It's for its auto attack purposes. You can also use the Wind Blast, which is really useful for crowd control type applications, whether it be in PvP by capping a point or by knocking an enemy off a cliff. The Static Field is another useful application as well for crowd controlling, again for PvP or stopping an enemy in its tracks. And the last one is Lightning Leap. Helps you travel around much easier. You can also use it in conjunction with the static field to apply vulnerability to enemies. The fourth one right here is actually pretty useless in my opinion. Most of the time if you're fighting 1 or 2 enemies, you're going to miss almost all these hits. Now it'll be much more applicable if you're fighting 5 enemies near you at once. In that case, the damage is reasonable, or is justifiable. So the next thing I'm going to discuss is Conjuror Shield is another skill that's very useful as well. When you're fighting world versus world, the magnetic shield, or the fourth ability, allows you to pull enemies off towers, and you can definitely do a lot with it. You can yank off people and then kill them right afterward by dazing them with the magnetic surge and then crippling them, or you can use the invulnerability in harder dungeons such as fractals when you might get Agni shots in. So those are applications for Conjuror Shield. And then I will be discussing Conjuror Fiery Greatsword in much more detail in a future video, because it does require a lot more knowledge and in-depth and much more explanation for that ability. And the last thing I want to discuss is what I run underwater, because underwater combat is just as important as on-land combat. So for underwater, selection of the utilities, again, the Glyph of Elemental Harmony has a half-second cast underwater, as opposed to the online equivalent, which is 1.25 seconds. It's also important to note that you can't use ether renewal underwater. So Glyph of Elemental Harmony is definitely the best thing to use underwater. For the other 3 utilities, I run Misform, Arcane Wave, and Signet of Air. Now the reason for using Signet of Air is because of the 25% passive move speed. It's really hard to get permanent swiftness underwater because you don't have access to as many abilities that are dedicated to giving you swiftness. So that's why that's chosen. And then for Arcane Wave, the reason for that is to use this as a combo finisher. So the Elementalist has some pretty neat combos. You have a 13-second stealth that you can give yourself if you target the ground using the Earth 5 ability combined with the Water 4 and the Water 3, and you get 13 seconds of stealth. And you can do this to escape any situation that you want. That's why the Arcane Wave is chosen for blast finisher combo applications. And obviously the Whirlpool is just the tornado equivalent underwater, and you can't change this. So that is that. But it's also important to note that you might want to use a combo field before you use Whirlpool in order to get burning bolts or cleansing bolts or whatever field application that you're using. And that is the end of my video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you guys learned something from it. If you like this video, subscribe. If you haven't already, in future videos, I will be discussing more what I do in terms of thinking for my attunements in various situations and why I do that. So look forward to that. I'll probably be uploading it next week, and thank you again for watching.